House prices in the UK defied every single economic law last year. It was the prediction that every expert got dead wrong. In just 18 terrifying months, the Bank of England's base rate, the single most important lever for the entire economy, was violently slammed, moving from practically zero to a crushing 5.25%. Every economist, every financial analyst, every estate agent, they all lined up to announce the same coming disaster: the housing market was going to crash. Forecasts were thrown around like wildfire. 10%, 15%, even 20% falls were expected. Sellers panicked. Buyers froze. The market should have collapsed into a deep, dark freeze. But that's not what happened. The UK property market barely flinched. It took a tiny, short-lived stumble in late 2022, a small 5% dip in a few areas, and then, with breathtaking audacity, prices started climbing again. By the close of 2024, the average UK home price was higher than it had been at the very peak before the rate hikes began. The economic laws of gravity seemed to have been suspended just for the British house. And that's the shock. Why? Why did the market stare down the barrel of the fastest interest rate hiking cycle in British history and simply shrug? The answer isn't in the headlines or the Bank of England's boardroom, it's hidden in the quiet, uncomfortable truths about who is actually buying property in the UK, and who is being systematically shut out. Right now, the market is caught in the most volatile and unprecedented position in decades, and what's happening beneath the surface could change the financial future for every single British household. Rates may have been cut twice since that 5.25% peak, a welcome drop to 4% for some, but the high mortgage rates are still hovering, and the true pain of the high-rate environment hasn't even hit millions of homeowners yet. They are still comfortably locked into old, cheap fixed deals from the pre-pandemic era. That massive, unavoidable financial reckoning is still coming, and it will be devastating for those who aren't prepared. It's a ticking time bomb of debt that will reshape the entire housing landscape. Understanding why the market didn't crash is key to seeing the chaos that's coming next. This story is bigger than just interest rates, it's about wealth, supply, and a system rigged against the young. The crash everyone predicted never came, but the crisis that is brewing is far more complex and far more brutal. The current volatility, combined with the delayed effect of the rate hikes, is creating a perfect storm where the market is set to experience both stability and complete financial collapse simultaneously, depending entirely on which side of the housing ladder you are currently standing. This is the dark secret of the UK property market, and it's about to be exposed. The second pillar is the one that truly shocked researchers when the data was finally crunched: the rise of the cash buyer and the mortgage-free majority. For years, we thought of the housing market as driven by families with a mortgage. That world is over. A seismic demographic shift occurred around 2023, where more than half of all UK homeowners now own their property outright, with no mortgage whatsoever. These are people completely insulated from interest rate hikes. They don't care if their base rate is 1% or 10%. Their spending power remained untouched. Furthermore, the pandemic helped them accumulate massive, unprecedented savings because they couldn't spend money on travel, dining, or entertainment. This massive pool of cash-rich individuals, often older, wealthier homeowners downsizing or buying second homes, stepped into the market with no need for a high-rate mortgage. They pay in cash, or with colossal deposits, effectively competing against first-time buyers who are struggling to scrape together a 10% deposit. Their demand for property as a safe asset kept the bottom of the market from falling out and provided a constant, stable layer of high-value transactions. They are the quiet force that kept the whole structure upright. The third pillar is the most politically uncomfortable: the accelerating concentration of wealth at the top. While ordinary families were being annihilated by the cost of living crisis, soaring energy bills, rampant inflation, the wealthiest segments of society, those with significant assets, saw their net worth explode. They view property not as a home, but as an investment vehicle and a hedge against inflation. They were able to use their growing wealth to buy up property, transforming homes into rental investments, further tightening the supply chain. They can stomach higher rates because their wealth accumulation outpaced them, or they simply pay cash. Their demand for assets, including houses, is essentially inelastic. It doesn't change based on a 1% rate movement. This relentless appetite from the wealthy for more and more property kept prices elevated even as the ability of average people to afford them collapsed entirely. The crash everyone predicted didn't happen because a significant and powerful segment of the population was entirely immune to the mechanism that was supposed to trigger it. They had the cash, they had the security, and they had the desire to invest, ensuring that every time a price correction seemed imminent, there was a wealthy buyer waiting to scoop up their bargain. This elite spending kept prices high, but for millions of others, the real estate dream was quickly becoming a nightmare. Section 2, the affordability nightmare of generation rent. The resilience of house prices might be presented as a success story for the stability of the UK economy, but for millions of young people, it is nothing less than a financial and psychological disaster. While the wealthy and the mortgage-free were insulating the market from a crash, a catastrophe was unfolding for everyone else. This is the reality of generation rent. Let's look at the cold, hard numbers. The average UK house price is sitting around £270,000. In vast swathes of the country, it's already past £290,000. For a first-time buyer to secure a 10% deposit, they need at least £27,000 in cash. That is the barrier to entry. For an individual earning the UK median salary of £34,000 per year, after tax and living expenses, saving that £27,000 would take years, potentially a decade, and that's assuming they can live with the financial discipline of a monk. But here is the crushing complication: while they save, the target is constantly moving. Because prices aren't crashing, they are still rising, albeit slowly, by 2 to 3% per year. Every month they wait, the deposit they need gets bigger. It's an impossible treadmill. And what makes this treadmill a literal nightmare is the rental market. Rents have absolutely exploded. The annual increase in private rents over the last year was a staggering 9.1%, one of the highest figures ever recorded. Think about what that means for someone trying to save a deposit. They are already spending a crushing amount of their income, often 40% to 50%, just to keep a roof over their head. When their rent goes up by 9.1%, any marginal savings they were making are instantly wiped out. The cycle is brutal and self-perpetuating. High rents make it impossible to save for a deposit, which means people stay renting forever, which keeps demand for rentals insane, which allows landlords to keep pushing rents higher. There is no escape route for millions of people caught in this spiral. They are being financially strangled by the twin forces of elevated house prices and soaring rents. For a first-time buyer in the highly competitive London and South East market, the situation is even more dire. Here, the average home price often demands a deposit of £50,000 or more. To even be considered for a mortgage on an average London flat, you need a household income well over £100,000. This completely excludes the vast majority of essential workers, teachers, nurses, and young professionals. The dream of ownership has been outsourced to those with family wealth, their bank of mum and dad, or those who receive a substantial inheritance. For a young person without that generational wealth, the housing ladder has simply been removed. They are not struggling to climb it, it's just not there. The irony of the market's stability is that it has been achieved at the direct, brutal expense of the youngest generation. The market didn't crash because the people who could afford to buy were insulated, and the people who needed to buy were forced to pay punishing rents, further enriching the very landlords and owners who are holding the market up. It's a closed loop of wealth transfer, from the poor to the rich. And what makes this worse is the fact that for all the pain, the biggest financial shock for the entire UK economy hasn't even fully landed yet. That vicious cycle is about to collide with a massive, unavoidable deadline that affects nearly half of all homeowners. Section 3, the £500 per month time bomb. Here is the crucial fact that has been flying under the radar, a financial ticking time bomb that will unleash the full, delayed force of the Bank of England's rate hikes on millions of households. 3/4 of all UK mortgages are currently on fixed-rate deals. This sounds like financial stability, but it's actually a huge risk. When the Bank of England aggressively began hiking rates, most homeowners didn't feel it immediately because they were locked into cheap deals from the pandemic era, some as low as 1.5% or 2%. They were protected. That protection is rapidly expiring. The Bank of England has publicly estimated that 4.4 million households, which is nearly half of all mortgage holders in the country, still need to remortgage onto the current, brutally high rates between now and the end of 2027. This isn't a trickle of remortgages, this is a relentless, 4-year flood of people forced to choose a new deal. The financial fallout is terrifying. When these individuals switch from a 2% rate to a new rate of 5% or 5.5%, which is the current reality for most new deals, their monthly mortgage payments are going to jump dramatically. For a family with a standard £150,000 mortgage, the increase can easily be £200 to £300 per month. For larger, £300,000 mortgages, the jump can be a catastrophic £500 or more per month. This is not just a pinch, it's a massive, permanent reduction in disposable income for millions of working families. The money they were using for childcare, groceries, or saving will instead be poured directly into higher mortgage interest. This is the deferred economic pain of the rate hikes finally coming home. The mortgage crisis hasn't even fully hit the UK yet. We are currently living in a false calm, where house prices have held firm because the financial burden of the high rates has been artificially distributed over a multi-year period by the fixed-rate structure. The sheer volume of people who will be hit by this makes it a potential disaster for consumer spending and the broader economy. Many of these people, who were financially stretched even before the rate hikes, will now be faced with impossible choices. They will have to cut spending drastically, take on second jobs, or, for the most desperate, be forced to sell. If a significant number of these 4.4 million households are forced to downsize or sell up, it will create a significant influx of properties onto the market, potentially destabilizing prices. This is the true crash scenario, not a sudden, global event, but a slow, agonizing wave of financial distress hitting the market from the inside out. Analysts who predicted the crash too early were simply looking at the wrong indicator. The economic impact was never going to be immediate, it was always going to be gradual, dictated by the multi-year timetable of fixed-rate renewals. What's terrifying is that this period, between 2024 and 2027, is when that £500 per month pain will become reality for one family after another, week after week. It's an unprecedented transfer of wealth from ordinary homeowners to banks, all while the house prices themselves remain stubbornly high, leading to a situation where people are struggling financially while sitting on an expensive asset. The South is freezing solid, but in the North, something entirely different, a property gold rush, is taking hold. Section 4, The Great Regional Divide. To talk about the UK housing market is to fundamentally misunderstand the current reality. It is no longer one unified market, it is a tale of two countries, and the financial divide is widening at an alarming rate. Where you live in the UK now dictates whether your financial future is one of booming growth or hopeless stagnation. The South, particularly London and the South East, has reached a point of catastrophic unaffordability. In vast parts of the capital, price growth has basically stalled, and in some boroughs, prices are actually falling slightly. The average time it takes to sell a property in London has jumped to 45 days, a signal of a slow, nervous market where sellers are waiting longer and often accepting lower offers. The simple problem is that prices are so astronomically high that the pool of eligible buyers who can afford the £50,000 deposit and the £100,000 plus required household income has been virtually exhausted. The market is running out of people who can afford to keep it going. For the few properties that do sell, the price is being dictated by the cash-rich investors and those buying with family money. In complete contrast, the northern cities are absolutely booming. Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, Liverpool. These urban centres are seeing strong, consistent price growth of 2% to 4% or more, leading the national average. Why? Because they are still relatively affordable. A young professional or a family priced out of London can move to Manchester, find a great job, and actually stand a chance of buying a home. This shift is being fueled by an exodus of young talent from the South, coupled with massive investor confidence. Investors are pouring into these cities because rental yields are far better than in the Southeast, and they sense a long-term regeneration story. Improved transport links, major infrastructure projects, and a lower base price make these cities highly attractive to those with capital. This is creating a cycle of growth. Investors pile in, prices rise, young professionals move there for the improving job prospects, and the local economy flourishes. The geography of opportunity in Britain is shifting dramatically, and it's creating a dangerous chasm. For a first-time buyer, the postcode is now their destiny. If you are determined to stay in London or the southeast, you are essentially priced out unless you are already wealthy. The stamp duty changes, which saw the tax-free threshold drop, hit these areas hardest because almost all properties there above the new limit, adding thousands in unexpected tax. But if you are willing to relocate to a thriving northern hub, the dream of ownership, while still a struggle, is not impossible. The regional divide is set to get even wider. As London stagnates under the weight of its own obscene prices, the northern cities will continue to attract investment, jobs, and people, leading to a sustained, but slower, rise in prices. This means that house price growth will become increasingly tied to local economic dynamism and, crucially, affordability metrics. This split market is a reflection of a deeply unequal economy, but it also creates the one small glimmer of hope for buyers willing to relocate. Yet even in these booming cities, there's a silent threat brewing, a market exit that will send rents spiraling into the stratosphere. Section 5, Landlords, Tax, and the Rental Squeeze. Just as the market is grappling with the delayed impact of high interest rates and a huge regional split, another political decision is creating absolute panic among landlords, threatening to collapse the supply of rental properties and trap generation rent even further. The government, in a bid to raise tax revenue and seemingly to discourage buy-to-let investment, has been aggressively increasing the tax burden on those who own additional properties. The stamp duty surcharge on second homes was already at 3%. In October 2024, it was hiked again, and then from April 2025, new rules came in, hitting the core of the buy-to-let market. Specifically, landlords buying properties between £125,000 and £250,000 now face an additional 2% charge on top of everything else. Buy-to-let is becoming ruinously expensive from a tax and interest rate perspective. Landlords are also dealing with stricter regulations, new energy efficiency requirements, and political rhetoric that often portrays them as villains. Many landlords are now looking at their portfolio balance sheets and deciding that it is no longer worth it. They are actively considering, or already undertaking, an exit from the market. If landlords start selling up en masse, where does that leave the millions of renters? The theory held by some is that these properties will simply be bought by first-time buyers, increasing supply and lowering prices. That is a fantasy. In reality, most of the properties sold by exiting landlords will be snapped up by other, larger investors, or by the cash-rich buyers who don't need a mortgage. The properties remain an investment asset, just changing hands. Meanwhile, the actual supply of available rental properties shrinks dramatically. Fewer rental properties available for an ever-growing pool of tenants means only one thing: rents will continue to spiral upwards. This creates a terrifying nightmare scenario for tenants. Rents have never been higher, already consuming up to 50% of a young person's income, and a landlord exodus will apply further pressure to an already strained system. Experts are unified in their warning: any increase in tax or regulatory cost for a landlord is simply passed directly onto the tenant. The tenant pays the penalty for every policy change designed to punish the investor. For the millions trapped in the rental cycle, this is a crisis without end. They are being forced to spend an ever-increasing portion of their income just to survive, making the saving of a deposit literally impossible. They will stay renting forever, fueling the very demand that keeps rents high, while the properties they can't afford to buy continue to increase in value. The uncomfortable truth is that the UK housing market is designed to benefit the people who already own property and relentlessly punishes everyone who doesn't. The policy is to keep the value of the main economic asset, housing, high, even if it means destroying the financial future and hope of an entire generation. Ultimately, this crisis isn't just about economics. It's about a system that is deliberately designed to benefit one group and crush the hope of another. Section 6, The Rigged System and the Path to True Crisis. The UK housing market is not a meritocracy, it is an aristocracy of property. That is the uncomfortable truth at the heart of the current crisis. If you are a homeowner, especially one who bought years ago or is now mortgage-free, rising house prices feel like a great success. Your wealth is increasing, you feel richer, and you have security. Your house is doing a better job of earning money than your salary is. But if you are young, renting, or dependent on a salary to get on the ladder, rising prices are a sign of a fundamental, societal failure. They represent a lifetime of struggle and the systematic removal of the wealth-building opportunities enjoyed by previous generations. The ugly reality is that the British economy has become thoroughly addicted to rising house prices. Governments of all stripes are terrified of a price crash because so much of the UK's financial stability hinges on property values staying high. Consumer confidence, bank stability, pension funds, and the entire construction sector, it's all linked to housing. This means that politicians will say they want affordability, but their actions are always aimed to compound this 2 to 3% rise over a decade, and homes become 20% to 30% more expensive than they are now. The wealth gap will not just widen, it will explode. Inheritance will become the primary vehicle through which property wealth is acquired. That is not a healthy housing market, that is the birth of a landed aristocracy, where a home is a right determined by your parents' wealth, not your own effort. The system is rigged to maintain the status quo, even though the status quo is fundamentally unsustainable and morally bankrupt. To fix this, Britain needs radical political courage that is simply not on the table. It requires building significantly more social and genuinely affordable homes, not just luxury flats for overseas investors. It requires a complete overhaul of stamp duty, moving the tax from transactions to ownership, specifically, multiple ownership, to disincentivize buy-to-let portfolios. And it requires the acceptance that the era of ever-rising house prices must end.